God's ability to redeem time speaks to his sovereignty and love in a deeply personal way. While people often focus on changing their current situations, God goes further. He addresses the time that feels lost or wasted. The years that were filled with regret, pain, or waiting are not ignored by God. Instead, he gathers those seasons and redeems them, turning them into something meaningful and purposeful. Life often brings unexpected detours, bad choices, broken relationships, lost opportunities, or simply seasons of spiritual dryness. In those moments, it can feel like time has slipped through your fingers. But with God, no moment is ever truly wasted. He is able to take even the most unproductive or painful periods and bring forth fruit from them, as if planting seeds in barren soil that suddenly burst into life. This redemptive power is evident throughout Scripture. Think of Joseph, who spent years in prison before being elevated to power in Egypt. Those years weren't a waste, they were preparation. David waited in caves before becoming king. Even Jesus spent 30 years in quiet obscurity before beginning his public ministry. In each case, time was not lost. It was being shaped by God's hand for something greater. God doesn't just fix broken situations. He restores what was lost along the way. That could mean restoring peace, joy, hope, or even opportunities that seemed gone forever. He has a way of accelerating growth, bringing unexpected doors, and allowing you to accomplish in a short time what once seemed like it would take a lifetime. His restoration is not limited to what we can imagine. While we may mourn the years we feel we've wasted, God sees them differently. He doesn't discard those seasons. He reclaims them. Through grace, he weaves even our failures and delays into the fabric of his divine plan. And when he redeems time, he doesn't just give it back as it was. He makes it better, fuller, and more purposeful than it ever could have been on its own. God's restoration reaches into the deepest, darkest places of our lives, places we may think are too broken, too far gone, or too painful to be healed. But there is no limit to what he can redeem. No sin is too great, no situation too shattered, and no past too messy for his restoring power. He doesn't just repair what's broken. He makes it new, whole, and even better than before. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of people who thought they had reached the end of their story. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, but Jesus restored him and used him to build the early church. The woman caught in adultery was about to be condemned, but Jesus gave her a new chance at life. Over and over, God stepped into situations that seemed hopeless and brought complete transformation. What makes God's restoration so powerful is that it's not limited by our human perspective. We often look at situations and determine they're beyond fixing, but God sees them through the eyes of eternity. His grace goes deeper than our mistakes, and his love covers every scar. When we surrender our brokenness to him, he doesn't just patch us up. He gives us a new identity and a fresh beginning. God's restoration also works in ways we don't always expect. Sometimes it means healing our hearts rather than changing our circumstances. Other times it means opening doors we thought were closed forever or bringing people back into our lives after years of separation. Whatever it looks like, his restoration is always perfect in timing and full of purpose. The beauty of God's character is that he delights in restoration. He doesn't hold our past against us, but instead uses it as a canvas to display his mercy and power. Even in our lowest moments, he is already working behind the scenes to rebuild, renew, and restore. What we thought was over, he can bring back to life in ways that glorify him and bless us beyond our imagination. Many people carry the weight of their past, believing it limits their future or disqualifies them from God's blessings. But with God, your past is not the final word. It's the starting point of a greater story. He doesn't define you by your failures, mistakes, or the things that happened to you. Instead, he looks at your heart and your willingness to follow him forward. In Scripture, some of the most powerful leaders had deeply flawed pasts. Moses was a murderer before he became the deliverer of Israel. Paul persecuted Christians before becoming one of the greatest apostles. Rahab was a prostitute, yet she was part of the lineage of Jesus. These stories remind us that God doesn't choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. He sees potential and purpose, even in most unlikely people. Our past may shape us, but it doesn't have to confine us. When we bring our history to God with a repentant heart, he forgives completely and offers a new identity. He doesn't keep a record of wrongs. He gives us a clean slate. Through Christ, we become new creations, and the old life no longer has control over our destiny. One of the enemy's greatest weapons is shame, reminding us of who we were, hoping we'll forget who we are becoming. But God silences shame with truth. He tells us we are redeemed, restored, and deeply loved. When we align ourselves with His truth, we start walking in confidence, not because of our past, but because of His promises. Living in the freedom that our past doesn't define us allows us to dream again, love again, and hope again, and hope again. It frees us to pursue the future God has planned, a future filled with peace, purpose, and potential. Every step we take with Him is a step away from what was and a step closer to what can be. When God restores, He often does more than just return what was lost. He multiplies it. His restoration is not a mere replacement, but an overflow of His goodness. In Joel 2:25-26, God promises to restore the years the locusts have eaten, and follows that with a promise of abundance. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied. This shows us that restoration in God's hands leads to fullness, not just survival. In our human thinking, we hope to just get back to where we were before the loss or failure. But God has a way of turning broken seasons into breakthrough seasons. He can bring new relationships, better opportunities, deeper joy, and stronger faith than we ever had before. What we thought we lost forever often returns in a richer and more meaningful form. God's abundance isn't only material. It includes peace, purpose, strength, wisdom, and spiritual maturity. These are the kinds of treasures that trials can produce when we let God do the work of restoration in us. The process might be uncomfortable, even painful at times, but the outcome is often more than we could ask or imagine. Throughout Scripture, we see this pattern again and again. Job lost everything, yet God restored him with double what he had before. Naomi lost her husband and sons, but God gave her a legacy through Ruth and Boaz that would lead to King David and eventually to Jesus. These stories remind us that God's restoration is never shallow. It's overflowing and deeply rooted in His divine plan. The abundant restoration God brings also reveals His heart. He's not a God who simply wants to make things okay again. He wants to bless, overflow, and remind us that He is a generous Father. When we wait on Him and trust His timing, the restoration that comes carries more than just what we hope for. It carries His love, favor, and abundance in every area of our lives. Waiting can be one of the hardest parts of faith, especially when it feels like God is silent or slow to act. But trusting God's timing means believing that He knows what is best, not just in outcome, but in when it happens. When it happens. His timing is never late, even if it doesn't align with our expectations. He sees the full picture, while we often only see a small piece. Throughout the Bible, we see people who had to wait on God's promises. Abraham waited decades for the son God promised. David was anointed king, but waited years before sitting on the throne. Jesus Himself waited 30 years before beginning His ministry. Each delay had a purpose, shaping character, preparing the heart, and aligning circumstances for the fullness of what God intended. When we try to rush ahead of God, we often step into confusion, disappointment, or even unnecessary pain. His timing is a shield that protects us from things we're not yet ready for. Sometimes what feels like a delay is really divine preparation, God getting us ready for the weight of what He wants to give us. Trusting His timing also means releasing control. It's an act of surrender to say, God, I believe You know when I'm ready, and I trust You'll move when the time is right. That level of faith deepens our relationship with Him and strengthens our spiritual maturity. It turns waiting into worship and frustration into peace. As we trust God's timing, we begin to see delays not as denials, but as part of His design. When the breakthrough finally comes, we're able to look back and see that the waiting season wasn't wasted. It was working. And often, what He brings in His perfect time is far greater than anything we could have achieved in our own.